Hello, and welcome to Let's Make a Top-Down Shooter. This video is about applying damage to a regenerating shield attribute before applying the remaining damage to a health attribute. Now, since damage is directly being applied to a single attribute in the GE damage gameplay effect, but we want it to apply to both shield and then health, we're going to use a third attribute InDamage to do that. So I'm adding a shield, max shield, a shield regen attribute, a shield regen delay attribute. Also going to override the post gameplay effect execute function. First, we make sure that we're setting default values for these new attributes. InDamage doesn't need to be set because it's going to be set to 0, and then anytime it's used, it's also being reset to 0. So we're going to set shield and max shield to 0 because, as stated in the first video, this health set may also be applied to enemies or objects or whatever. So we don't need those things to have shields or shield regen. We'll just use a delay of 1 second as a default. So being that shield has a max value, we also want to clamp it here. And then I'm going to add that new function. This will require this header file for the gameplay effect mod callback data. So what this function is that it gets called after a gameplay effect changes an attribute. So we're checking to make sure that the attribute being changed is the InDamage attribute. We're saving that value, setting the InDamage back to 0. As long as InDamage is greater than 0, we check to see if there's any shield left. We're setting the shield value, and then we're checking to see the minimum between the shield and the InDamage. If the shield is the lower value, when it's subtracted, the shield will become 0. If the InDamage value is the lower value, then the InDamage done will become 0. So then we set the shield. As long as InDamage done is higher than the shield was before this was called, it then also gets applied to health. Now we want to add the same things we did for the health attributes for shield. And then make sure we hook up the delegate. That one doesn't change. With that done, we can compile and launch the editor. So first, we're going to go back into the GE damage gameplay effect. It's currently applying to health, so now we want to apply it to InDamage. And the way that's being set up is in the third person. The sign tag set by color magnitude. This is -10, so -10 to health, but as an InDamage, it needs to be a positive value, so that will be 10. Also right here, missing, I don't know if there's an Unreal 5.3 bug or whatnot, but the input action for weapon fire disappeared, closing and opening the project. So I'm going to switch it to use mouse event left mouse down, or left mouse button. I just throw this over here since it's temporary. And I'm going to add on shield changed event as well. And if we go back in here, you can see that it's applying it to health. It's not applying it to shield because we also need to add some attributes in here. So I'm going to add all 4 attributes. I'll close these first so they're not in the way. So as a reminder, we want to set max shield before shield. These are set to override. We'll set the magnitude to 50. For shield regen, we just set the modifier to 5. And for shield regen delay, we'll set it to 2. You see it's applying to shield. There's no regen. When it gets down to 0, then it's applied to health. To add a shield regen, we can create another gameplay effect. We'll call this shield regen. This will be infinite. As a period of 1, we'll add a modifier to shield. A modifier will add, and we'll set this to attribute based. So when it's attribute based, we have a backing attribute here, which will be shield regen. And then we also need to remember to add this to the player. We'll do a search for default, find default effects. We'll add another one for shield regen. So now you can see that there's 2 lines because once per second the shield regen is being called and it's resulting in the event for on shield changed. So if I click to do damage, did the 10 damage, regen to 5 per second, it still go below 0, applies to health, and the shield just regens 5 per second. So if you don't like clunky regen like that, you can go back in here. You want to change the period and the coefficient. So the period is how many seconds per update. So we can change this to 0.2. The coefficient is the value that's multiplied by, in this case, the attribute. So 5 times 1 would be 5 every 0.2 seconds. So we set this to 0.2, and now it'll be 5 times 0.2, which is 1 per second. Which means we get a lot more spam up here. Do some damage. And over 1 second, it's doing 5 regen. Now, if we don't want all that print spam, we can just go in here, add a branch, oops, hold B, click. We are checking to see if old value is not equal to new value. You can now alt click that to remove it. So now it's only printing out when it's updated. Now shield regen delay is just the time between taking damage and the shield regen working. So to suppress the shield regen, first we need to go back into shield regen. We're going to add a component. The component will be target tag requirements. Now this is quite different than it was in 5.2 and below when you had a gameplay effect. Basically all of these types of components were just in a huge list down at the bottom. So now you have to know which one you're looking for, specifically add it and apply it. So in this case, we have an ongoing tag requirement, which is must not have a certain tag. So that tag, which we will create, we'll call it shield.regen suppress. and it needs a source. Add new tag, click it. So this means that anytime this tag exists on the player, the tick will basically suppress the regen. So to do that, we need to add another gameplay effect. We'll call this GE Shield Regen Suppress. This will be a duration-based gameplay effect, where the duration magnitude will also be based on an attribute. The backing attribute will be the shield regen delay, and the source should be target. Because if one actor is applying this to the other, they will be applying it through the damage. The GE damage gameplay effect will apply the shield regen delay, but we want to use the target's value, not the source. And in this case, we're also adding a tag, so this is a component of type target tags. So in this case, this tag will be added anytime this gameplay effect is attached. And then we do that in GE damage. So again, we're going to add a component to GE damage. This will be additional effects gameplay effect component. And on application gameplay effect. And then we choose our shield regen suppress. So when damage is applied by this gameplay effect, it will add this other gameplay effect. That effect will add the tag down here to the target, and while that tag exists, regen will be suppressed. So I click once, waits 2 seconds, and then regen starts. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel or you just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.